A warm welcome, everybody, to our seminar Beyond Mononormativity with Niki D. And Niki, very pleased to welcome you, and over to you to get started on the seminar.
Thanks, John, and thank you for everyone who's come to see this, and it's really lovely to recognise some faces and names, so hello to those people that I know. And I wanted to focus in why I chose to think about mononormativity is because everything that's normed is made so kind of mainstream that most often we don't even think about what it is. And although the norming of gender and the norming of sexuality, the norming of bodies, normings around race is considered and talked about a fair bit, not enough, but a fair bit, the norming of relationship styles is not, I don't think. And certainly from the clients that come to me who've been to see kind of mainstream therapists with very little knowledge of the norming of monogamy, and those that live beyond monogamy really encounter some kind of restrictions, limitations, and end up leaving often. So I wanted us to think about today, like kind of what is mononormativity. It's not a term that's often used. Often people don't, kind of can put the two together. It's the norming of monogamy, but what actually does that mean, and how does that impact us as the therapists or the psychologists or the counsellors, and also the clients when they bring in mononormative statements or impressions, or when they're living in relationship styles that aren't monogamous. Now, I'm not here to promote one relationship style over any others. Monogamy can be just as marvelous and just as terrible, just as liberating and just as restricting as any other relationship style. The focus is definitely on mononormativity. So I'll talk a bit about what that is, how it shows up. And then I wanted to introduce a kind of 7-stage model of co-creating an open relationship that I put together for a chapter in Pink Therapy, Erotic, it was Relationally Queer was the title. And I found it of use for some therapists, of use with some clients, but it offers some guidance. I won't go into big detail about it, and some of you will know it already, but I wanted to offer it here. And I can also send out a copy of the chapter that I wrote for those that want to read more about opening up relationships from a kind of closed relationship to an open one. The personal and political, I wanted to mention at the beginning. The personal and political are intertwined, just like the mind-body is all one. Our mind and our body, often the terms are used as one word, which kind of more accurately connects the fact that our mind is in our mind and our body are intertwined. I think the same, well, obviously we know the same is with personal and political and professional. So my profession and how I am with my clients, or my ideas of how I am professional, is very much informed by how I am in the world, and the views that I choose, the views that I don't even realize I might be choosing, and the kind of way I live my life. So for me, I've always questioned monogamy from very early age. It's just never really made a lot of sense to me. It doesn't seem very logical. There was always this idea in my mind from very young that, why are people only having relationships one at a time, or one person, and they're meant to last forever? And yet we can have these multiple friendships, and we can have multiple other connections. So the way I've lived my relationships has tended to be in an open kind of way. What I think of more as kind of co-creating. I don't necessarily want to take on a label as such, but each kind of person or people involved, there's a conversation to be had. What can be co-created between us? It doesn't have to be limited to a particular relationship structure that's imposed on us. So because I've lived in ways that go against the kind of mainstream, my experience of being misunderstood or patronized or marginalized or kind of ignored is quite strong. And the idea of, and also the kind of knowledge of what it is to come out as someone who isn't kind of having relationships in a mainstream way. And when I think about non-mainstream relationships, I don't necessarily just think about us with in other kind of romantic sexual connections. It's also people that choose to live solo, people that their deepest connections are to their companion animals. There's all the people that have queer platonic relationships that are really close and important to them. So the kind of beyond mononormativity is literally beyond the kind of norming of all sorts of different things. So it's the norming of what romance means, what intimacy means, what sexuality, what sex means, what desire means. It's the norming is so restrictive that and restricted that we often, don't necessarily consider it. So part of mononormativity is the idea of romantic love being dyadic, being enduring, being exclusive, being possessive, and other things besides, which actually I'm jumping ahead of myself, so I'll talk about that in a minute. What I wanted to let me tell you a little bit about the kind of professional element, which from the personal, which is that the majority of the people I work with in my practice, in terms of my relationship therapy practice, are in fact probably pretty much everyone is in a non-monogamous relationship. So whether they define that as polyamorous or open or swingers, or they're in a closed relationship but they're wanting to go towards open, or they're emotionally monogamous but sexually open. They might be in threes, in triads or throuples. They might be in I've had very recently my first quad that I worked with, which is 4 people in a relationship. So I kind of want to bring as well the experience I've had of working with people in all sorts of different combinations. When you work with people beyond mononormativity or monogamy, it also means working as a relationship therapy with metamors, for example. And a metamor is a term used for 2 people that share the same partner but aren't themselves emotionally or romantically connected, or sexually connected. So it's just a very rich, I think, and developing part of relationship therapy, but it also comes into your, work with individuals and work with groups. So I would love to ask, just as a group question, and I don't know how many of you can see the whole group. I'm hoping you can see a little bit. But for those that feel okay enough, you may not want to respond to the questions, but if you can put your hand up or use the function that John mentioned, which I didn't even know how to use before, but apparently you go to the heart on the reset and then you click on the hand. So a yes would be that. Yes would be raising your hand or using the function on the Zoom. And I want to ask this series of questions so we get a sense already as a group of what's kind of our relationship types or our relationship styles. So once again, obviously you are free to not be part of this. So the first question, like hands up, if you have more than one friend who you love and are committed to in a long-term way, an enduring way. I'm loving the little pops as the hands go. It's like little champagne bottles going off. Okay, next question. Staying with friends, hands up if you have more than one casual friendship. Pops are fantastic. Okay, second question. We're thinking about family. Hands up if you have more than one family member who you love and are committed to in a long-term way, or a long-term enduring. Gosh, even more. That's interesting. Okay, second question about family. Hands up if you have more than one casual family connection. Third question is about colleagues. You put your hands up if you have more than one colleague who you love and have a long-term commitment towards. Okay, so less than the family and friends, but and the other one is hands up if you have more than one casual colleague connection. I can never say collegial. Okay. Companion animals. I threw this in as because obviously we have a relationship with animals too. Put your hands up if you have more than one animal that you love and have a long-term commitment towards. And hands up if you have more than one casual animal connection. It's not a phrase that's usually used. And the last two categories, romantic partners. Put your hands up if you have more than one romantic partner who you love and have a long-term commitment to. And the same question, if you have more than one romantic partner that you have a casual connection to. And sexual connection, sexual partners or lovers. So hands up if you have more than one lover that you love and have a long-term commitment to. And hands up if you have more than one casual sexual connection, lover. Thank you. I mean, what I picked up from the numbers coming up is that we have multitudes of connections with family members, friendships, colleagues, and far less with animals, romantic partners, and lovers. I mean, this is an illustration, I guess. Well, this is why I thought I'd ask the question of what one of the impacts of mononormativity. It's the exclusivity that goes towards romantic and sexual relationships. It doesn't really focus on human animals and non-human animals, but there is something for me about that kind of love for animals being disregarded as well as part of it. And the cultural messages of the norming of monogamy, we are so steeped in. Many of us rarely get to question it. There are obviously some of us are brought up in or move in culture, in communities and smaller groups where that is more the norm. So kind of queer and trans and kind of polyamorous, well, obviously polyamorous, and kink and hippie and pagan. And there are other types of groups in the kind of contemporary Western worlds that challenge this. Now, I'm obviously only really talking about contemporary Western paradigms of relationships, because worldwide, the majority of relationships are not monogamous. There are many kind of cultural and religious, really patriarchal polygamy is quite widespread worldwide. I won't be focusing on that for this conversation, but that has its own kind of unique kind of dilemmas and challenges to think about. Compulsory monogamy is a term sometimes used to reference mononormativity. You're not even questioning it. Mononormativity doesn't even question that monogamy is only the way of having relationships. I said to my parents at the weekend when I was telling them about this talk, and they've been together for 60 years. I said, why did you choose monogamy? And they're like, choose it? we didn't get to choose it. It chose us. There was no other option. And then I said, what meant you stayed? You carried on choosing it. And they say again, we don't even think about the idea of choice in our relationship style. The terms monocentric is also part of a mononormative kind of frame. So monocentric is the centering of monogamy. And when you center one thing, obviously you create a kind of an other of everything else. And polyphobic is another term that's a part of mononormativity. So polyphobic is a phobia towards polyamory. Polyamory referring to multiple loves, rather multiple lovers, because multiple loves is another term that's been brought in to challenge mononormativity. and includes a love towards nature, towards spirituality, towards oneness, towards a variety of human connections, whether that's platonic, sexual, romantic, or otherwise. Couple privilege is also another part of mononormativity. So the privileging of the dyad, the elevation of the two. And this is seen in our legal system. I'm in the UK, and I know not everyone is, but in the UK, in the legal system, it's illegal to marry more than one person. So coupledom in that dyadic way is legally protected. You can actually get a 7-year prison sentence for marrying more than one person. It's outrageous. I work with quite a few thruples or triads who want to marry. They want to marry as a three. They have a relationship as a three. And they find creative ways of celebrating their multiple partnered relationships. Maybe one three that I'm thinking of, they had a legal marriage, and then they had a ceremony that celebrated the three of them with all their friends. There are tax benefits for married couples. There are insurance benefits for two people only. There are pension plans for two people only. Anniversary cards, Valentine's Day, all of that is around monogamy, is around two. It's around a couple. Hotel bookings, try booking when you're living as a quad. It's bloody difficult. Beds, the size of beds, and typically a normal double bed is not very good if there's three of you in it. So family size beds are great if it's your own home, but if you're booking to go on a romantic kind of holiday, you have to get a family room, and who gets to be in the single bed in the family room? So the kind of history, very, very brief history of monogamy is that it's relatively recent. It's 200 years old as a mainstream cultural norm within the kind of Western world. And it was introduced obviously when people were living into their 40s. So it was a lot easier to handle, I guess, one person at a time that way. Esther Perel talks about this in her wonderful YouTubes. It's a colonial, patriarchal, and Christian ideas of love and sexuality were kind of imposed on other countries worldwide, and those ideals were around monogamy. By the 1950s, one person was meant to meet the other partners, all their needs. Up until that point, extended families and neighborhoods and communities met multiple needs of one person. But by the 1950s, with industrialization and capitalism, it became much more one person only. Other terms that you might not have heard of, but I think are useful, is a relationship escalator that was introduced by Amy Karan to talk about the norming of a way of moving into a relationship, the kind of cultural norm of it. So you meet someone, you're dating, you kiss, you have sex with, you might move in with, then you get, I don't know, engagement, have a child, get married, or the other way around, I think, buy a house at some point in there. There's this relationship escalator that has a very clear trajectory. And obviously anyone doing it differently is judged against that. So obviously many, many ways of doing that differently. The notions of successful monogamous relationships, according to a mononormative lens, is around longevity and is around sexual and romantic exclusivity. They're the measures. And this comes from a starvation, what's called a starvation mentality towards love and kind of romance. The idea that there's one person out there for you, that there's a soulmate, that we can be two peas in a pod, that there aren't many people to choose from. An abundance mentality is more from a kind of polyamorous language or thinking, and obviously says what it is. And there are many people that could be compatible for us at different points who may or may not meet, but there isn't this idea of having to hold on to one person who's going to be with me for the long term. From that starvation mentality, jealousy and possessiveness are really kind of built in. It invites that type of notion of holding on, of protecting, of being threatened by any of your partner be desiring someone else, or your partner falling, having loving feelings towards someone else. I'll tell you who I think writes brilliantly about this is Jessica Fern, who's written 2 books, Polysecure. For anyone who's interested in attachment theory, she brings it into a much more, uses a polyamorous lens to reconfigure attachment theory. And also she wrote Polywise, which is really helpful for people, I think, who want to critique relationship paradigms. So monogamy is actually in trouble in the Western world. We've got high rates of divorce. 43% of marriages last year ended in divorce. We have lots of affairs. Majority of a monogamous relationship have an affair at some point. And 98% of people apparently have fantasies about other people other than the partner that they're with. We also have a culture that promotes monogamy as stability and security and a sign of maturity, and also commercializes and commodifies hookup culture, dating apps, pornography, where the emphasis is on short-term encounters, novelty, variety. And so there is a real tension between these two kind of forces in our culture. And I think many of our clients feel that tension. Breakups is another aspect of mononormativity that can be treated very differently when you're living beyond the norm. So breakups in mainstream kind of monogamous relationships tends to be out. You're done. The relationship is ended. I'm not seeing that person again. Obviously, if you've got children or you've got career and housing together, there's a lot to be negotiated. But the polyamorous and multi-partnered kind of connections use terms more like de-escalating or transitioning. And I've worked with quite a few, and currently still doing with quite a few twos that are changing from their, maybe a more intense relationship structure, or maybe they were nesting or cohabiting together, to one where they're no longer living together, or they've been part of a 3 and one of them still wants to stay in a relationship with one of them, but not the other. So there's a reconfiguring, and the constellation of the relationships has to be renegotiated and reformed. So there isn't always this idea of a clean break, but that while you're ending or changing the relationship with one particular or 2 people, there may be another new relationship that's coming in. It's far more complex, but far more creative, I think. Of course, the same can be part of a monogamy when there's still a connection needed, but there is less kind of encouragement to be creative and inventive in that, just to how do you stay together. So before, I'm going to ask for you to go into kind of rooms in a minute, but I want to just name a couple of questions that bring about for us to think about as therapists or counselors or psychologists working with clients. So do you advertise as a couple therapist is the first one. Because if you do, it's mononormative. You're norming a dyad, and you're kind of saying to anyone who's in a multiple partner relationship that you don't work with them. Do you have a room that can seat more than 2? Not everyone is privileged to have a big room, but what you expecting only to have 2 people. I mean, I'm lucky I work with groups as well as a group therapist, so I have a big space I can see bigger groups of relationship constellations. Do you take relationship therapy training, or did you receive relationship therapy training that gave any attention to open and polyamorous relationships, to living solo, to important platonic relationships? Does your relationship therapy training have rules that limit you working with more than 2 people in a relationship? Because I know some do. If you've read theory in the designated reading list in your training, did it critique the dominant relationship, intimacy, and sexuality discourses at all? Do you assume when a couple enter your room for therapy that they're monogamous? Do you ask couples, dyads, about their relationship paradigm that they're in and how they chose it? Do you tend to think that the problem in a client's relationship might be with the relationship structure of open and poly? And would you problematize a monogamous relationship in the same way if you do? Do you avoid talking with open and polyamorous clients in open and polyamorous relationships because you feel uncomfortable or unconfident with this aspect of them having a relationship? And do you hold beliefs that monogamy is healthier, is more mature, is a sign of commitment in romantic and sexual relationships? Do you believe that people can love more than one person at the same time in a romantic way? Do you hold any of those kind of mononormative assumptions that open and polyamorous folk are promiscuous or are avoidant or have attachment issues or can't commit, are immature? It's a phase they're going through. Do you hold a value hierarchy of relationships where, certain kind of people's relationships with animals and children and adults in different ways are more important than others? And do you know what to listen out for when you hear a mononormative comment from a colleague, from a in your training, or from a client? I'll just mention a few mononormative statements that come up, and certainly that I've heard in my practice. And it's useful to go in and query, like it is for any assumption or any opinion that's narrowed down and limited. So I wouldn't risk my relationship for casual sex. Our sex life is sacred, and I want to protect that, not to water it down. I need to be someone's first choice. And you're enough for me. Why can't I be enough for you? If you don't feel jealous or guilty, then you don't really love me. And it's because you're bisexual or gay or queer or trans that you want other lovers. And can't I satisfy you sexually? These types of comments may have all sorts of other elements to them, lots of insecurity, lots of fears, but also they're mononormative statements. So kind of just listening out for that and being able to ask a little more, invite some more thinking around how they form that opinion and that belief. So I'm going to invite us now. I'm going to pause this now and have us talk in triads, in throuples, for 10 minutes about a question that I'm going to put on the screen. Okay, where is the question? Oh, before I do that, little quote from Ernesto Spinelli: therapy can easily become employed as a means of imposing normative standards of thoughts and behaviors. It must be able to reevaluate its assumptions and theories when challenges come, and challenges have definitely come, particularly from our younger clients, 20s, 30s, but they've come. They're here. I was going to say, okay, let me read this out to you now before we go into the discussion groups. But these are types of relationship styles that go beyond mononormativity. So open relationships, also called CNM, consensual non-monogamy, or ENM, ethical non-monogamy. I've put those together. I meant to put them separately. So polyamory, which is, capacity to be in more than one relationship at the same time. Now, I don't know how to pronounce this properly, novogamy or novogamy, but Ferrer introduced this as a term that was one that moves as a kind of between monogamy and polyamory, that there's a movement between relationship structures, if you like. Swingers, new relationship anarchists or anarchy, where there's a non-hierarchical way of holding relationships. There's a whole relationship anarchist manifesto that Andy Nordridge, a Swedish person, I cannot pronounce the last name properly, in 2006 wrote. It's really worth reading. New monogamy, that was a term introduced by Tammy Nelson, and it's about a negotiated monogamy. She has a wonderful questionnaire in her book I often give to people. It's a really detailed questionnaire for people to consider the kind of the way they might feel secure or insecure with people's flirtation or fantasies about others or relationship or moves towards others. Monogamish, that was a term brought in by Dan Savage, 2011, and that's about a kind of sexual openness and in an emotionally monogamous couple. Relationships by design was brought in by another couple of therapists. It's about customizing relationships to include valuing the platonic and the intimate as well as the solo. Non-binary relationship styles, Meg John Barker's book, Rewriting the Rules. They talk about a continuum. So polyamory was at one end of the continuum and monogamy at the other, where people might fall with different people that they're seeing at the time. Plastic Sexualities and Confluent Love is by Gideon's, Relationships Based on Love and Respect. Radical Love, Wendy O. Matic, a radical love activist, wrote a book redefining our relationships. Liquid Love, Bowman talks about liquid love and critiques the kind of modern relationships in a consumer individualistic society. And Relational Freedom, it's another Ferrer kind of concept. So a relational freedom includes relational integrity, plasticity, autonomy, and transcendence. And essentially, he talks about the kind of merging and movement between exclusive and non-exclusive relationship styles, and the capacity to respond and not be necessarily limited by any one type of relationship. So there's some variety of including monogamy, of different ways of moving beyond mononormativity. So forgot this slide was in here. So this is thought to be some of the sources of therapist bias towards multiple partnered relationships is the cultural conditioning we come with, lack of exposure to multiple partnered or sexually open relationships, and issues of infidelity in the therapist's private life, making them more sensitive to and less tolerant or open to people who are having multiple connections. This is one way, I'm not giving you these slides, but I find this a useful way of looking at high levels of sexual emotional exclusivity, low levels of sexual emotional exclusivity, because it puts it more as a kind of spectrum, rather than positions it in a binary way of monogamy versus polyamory. Now, finally, I'm getting to the question, I think, on this next slide, which is, if in the inner three, would you just consider what type of relationship was promoted as healthy and desirable in your culture? And how has mononormativity impacted you? So if you feel comfortable to have those conversations with two other folk, that would be great if we could go. And if you're not comfortable, obviously stay in the main room or just drop back out and come back in. So we've got 10 minutes just to have a small conversation about these topics, these questions rather. Just to say, this really amused me, but there's a polyamorous term called polysaturated, which I think you can guess. Like when there's just too many people, you haven't got enough time, you haven't got enough resources. I have polysaturated my talk. I am not going to show you my 7-stage model because we don't have the time, but I will send it to you in the chapter instead, which is far better. You can read it, and some of you know it already. So maybe we use this 10 minutes instead as, any questions, any queries, any contributions that people might have as a result of their conversations or what I said.
I just really appreciated, obviously, listening to the workshop. We went out in the breakout rooms, we discussed different things. I think it brought a bit of the past into the present for me. Because when I was married, I was in a relationship where we was on ups and downs, and I was told I could go off and get married, so I did. And then I kind of came, and it was like I got the green light to do it. And then I came back, and then I felt a lot of guilt and a lot of shame through doing it. But now I probably wouldn't feel a lot of guilt and shame. So it was like kind of a conversation what was discussed, like, because I was a Muslim then, and it was like, because I grew up having a dad who was very polygamous. He used to have 3 or 4 wives living together. And as a child, I remember him back married to my mum and then married to 2 other women. So yeah, it brought up a lot of memories and stuff. And I think from my point of view, I kind of took some of those traits into my relationships. So being able to listen to what was said today was like, kind of took a lot of probably guilt and shame away. And and opened me up to what do I want? Do I want a single relationship, or would I want to live with lots of different partners? I don't know. So yeah.
Well, but thanks for being, your openness in sharing that with all of us, not just in your little throuple. And I mean, there's just so many more layers then you're bringing in. There would be a cultural layer that would be really interesting to kind of think about and talk about, and obviously no time. But
Yeah.
thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Actually, I mean, just because no one else is jumping in right now, can I ask you a question, if you're okay to respond? You said it, hearing what I was talking about took away some of the guilt and shame. What was it? Anything in particular that?
I think for me I think because I came from two cultures, because my mum's English and my dad is Iraqi and stuff, and I was on my mum's side, I was brought up to say that you have a single relationship, so it was like a conflict. And then on my dad's side, it was you go out and have different girlfriends, or you can get married to as many women as you want, just kind of live your life. Because I lived in a very English culture, kind of carried that forward where I had like this conditions of worth for expectations just to have one partner. So I'd love with this one partner, but we got to a situation where I just started to get these feelings that I wanted to have somebody else in my life. And we discussed it, and I would like us to live together in probably a very selfish, narcissistic way. But I think that's what came up, and then it was like, well, okay, if that's what makes you happy, go off. So I went off, and then basically I came back, and the guilt and shame was there, and like the shouting and the punishment. Why did you do it? I didn't think you'd go and do it and stuff like that. But yeah, I think what it was is it was like having that kind of conditions of worth, like when I was growing up, that or from one side that you should be doing a certain thing, you should just be marrying one woman, you should be having like children,
Yeah.
and that's what's expected of you, and that was the family side that I was involved with, was my mother more than my father.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I don't know if I answered your question.
not really, but it added something else.
But what? How would I answer your question, or
I
how
don't
would
know.
you answer it?
It may not have been a particularly helpful question. So it was more, was there anything in particular that was said that you said it kind of let go of some of your shame? I wondered what it was that you heard that allowed you to feel freer from whatever judgment you were carrying. But I'm also aware we've only got 5
Yeah.
minutes, so I don't want to put you on the spot
Yeah.
for any
No,
longer.
I can be really quick. I can be about really quick. I think what it was is you look very open. You look very open as a human being,
Ah,
and you look very accepting.
right.
So I think looking at the way you are and listening to what you were saying is release the shame, and it was as if to say, well, you're a person who isn't in a relationship with one person. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So it was like having that kind of um, support, knowing that I'm not on my own, or wouldn't be on my own. I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, it's beautiful, and thank you very much. I love that answer. And it also does make me think about therapist self-disclosure, and when it's really important, when it kind of invites, and the fact we're always self-disclosing by our way of being, and it's not necessarily information giving, it's a kind of a mode, isn't it, or an attitude, or a vibrancy or not. But how important it is when someone's marginalized or has been, judged, or for the therapist to be saying, this is how I live. I'm very clear in my website about some of the ways I identify or I live for that very reason. So it was really great thank you, Omar. That was really helpful. Appreciate that. Yeah. And any final question or contribution like Omar offered?
Laurie, do you want to?
Yes, I was wondering whether to come in with anything, because I think my question is still actually forming. But what's catching me is the idea that actually in the therapist community, that therapists will often say that they don't like working with clients who might have multiple therapists, and that actually perpetuates this idea of mononormativity. And I'm wondering, how do we what do we do about that within the community? How do we change the temperature of that? Because, you know, the arguments are often given around splitting, you know, conflict, how we manage it. So is there something that we can do? How do we change that narrative within our own community as therapists?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. It's something that I've always been struck by as well, that we're encouraged to be, well, we can be quite polyamorous with our supervisors. You have more than one supervisor, and you know, it doesn't seem to set up a jealousy or a kind of triangulation or any of that. But with therapists, got to be monogamous. It's got serial monogamy only with your own therapist. And I agree, there's something to be talked about in that. And of course, there are some really important considerations when you're with one person or one therapist, and if you're with multiple people or multiple therapists, and can you, you know, there are ways of having multiple therapists. People come to see me in group therapy, might see me individual, or someone else individual therapy, might see someone else for relationship therapy. So there are different ways of therapy being mixed. But yeah, I just think to have more conversation would be great, just to open it up and look at what's behind it. Whatever is policed, we need to look at who's doing the policing and who's benefiting from it, and who's being, you know, who's not, who's being disadvantaged by it. So any kind of rule in therapy, I think, needs to be kind of deconstructed and examined. So thank you for bringing that.
It's a lovely question. I'm wondering if where's the time, but I was really sitting with me and curious about is that so often when we talk about kind of normatives, the norm seem to feel like they don't have to be involved in the conversation sometimes, or like I remember having a conversation with someone about exploring their sexuality in my training, and their response was, well, I'm heterosexual, so I don't have to. And I'm wondering if there's something of that in this space that's needed as well, actually. Those who do choose to be monogamous, are they exploring that? Is that something that we can bring? Because I wonder how many people here are already having those questions, those explanations. Is it about bringing everyone in to that and it being an option?
Well, I think there's one, when I put the list of beyond normativity relationship styles, I included 2 forms of monogamy, you know, the monogamish and the new monogamy that Tammy Nelson talks about. And it is when monogamy is consciously chosen over being, compulsive, you know, the compulsive monogamy ideas of mononormativity. But yeah, the exploration of what monogamy can be and what it can include and what it can allow, and the variety within that. You know, flirting's okay. You know, if you're living in another country, well, it's an extended or an expanded monogamy. So yeah, I don't know if it's said so, but I'm glad you raised that right at the end, Esther.
And I think we've come to our kind of time for a break, haven't we?
Yeah.
I think there's people kind of thanking in the chat, I can see. So
Well, thank you all.
Thank you so much, Nick. It's really, really interesting. And I think, like, I don't know about everyone else, but it feels like the starting point of a really big conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to start having, particularly as therapists.
Yeah.
I think we're go for a break now.
Well, just to say before you all go, I'm running with a colleague, Alex Sanderson-Short. We're running the UK's first ever in-depth training on working with people in open polyamorous relationships. So it's online and it's also in residential options. So if you want to look on my website under CPD, there's some deep details there. For anyone who wants to really immerse themselves in it beyond an introductory kind of one day here, one day, half day there. So my little bid. For...
Well, and maybe when we send out your chapter, Niki, we can also send out the link to the website as well, so it's easy for colleagues to
great.
find
Thanks,
that.
Sean.
And I wanted to add my thanks as well to yours, Esther. Really appreciate this hour, Niki, and coming along and getting the conversation, or continuing the conversation, maybe beginning the conversation for some of us. So just very, very much appreciated. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think we're going to break, Esther, aren't we, for 5 minutes and then come back.
Break, and then we'll have the kind of the community space. Niki, you're welcome to kind of stay and join if you would like. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you everyone who kind of brought themselves to that space as well, particularly in that kind of breakout space.